welcome back to my channel. Now in this tutorial, I'm going to show you 2 ways of how to apply stripes to a cake using buttercream. One is the traditional method, just piping on stripes, and the other is using a comb like this. So these pattern scrapers are becoming more and more popular, and I'm getting lots of questions asking how to use them. Now the benefit of these scrapers is that the stripes that you achieve are really clear and defined. However, it is a slightly longer and more difficult process, which is why I want to compare using the scraper to piping on stripes like I usually would, because I prefer the easier method always. So what I'm going to show you first is using the scraper because, like I said, it is a longer process. So I've got my crumb-coated cake, which has been chilling enough for the first layer of buttercream to firm up. And I've got a fresh batch of Swiss meringue buttercream in here, which I have left white because I want the base of the stripes to be white, and I'm gonna color it after. So you can use any other buttercream with this technique. I personally find that Swiss meringue works the best because of the way it sets in between the stages, and you'll see what I mean in a bit. But first, what I'm going to do is cover the whole cake with a generous layer of the buttercream. So I'll start with putting some on top, spread that around the top, and I'm using my turntable and palette knife to continuously move the cake and spread the buttercream evenly. I'm then going to position the palette knife and rotate the turntable to achieve a nice flat top. And then I'm going to work my way down the sides. So you can see I am putting on quite a thick layer of buttercream here. You want it about 1 centimeter thick because we are going to be scraping off quite a lot, and of course you don't want to expose the cake underneath. Don't forget to cover the whole cake, including the very bottom corners where it's touching the cake board. Personally, I like starting off with white for the base because you don't know how much exactly you need, especially for the colored layers. So if you start off with white, you can then color the remainder rather than trying to work out exactly how much you need for the first color and then potentially running out of that colored buttercream. So I don't need to worry about smoothing it just yet because I am of course going to go over with the scraper, but I do want an even layer. So I think I've got there, just a little bit more here. Now, just before I scrape, I really want to make sure I've packed in those top corners. So I can see that some of the buttercream is actually going down here. I want to apply a little bit more just to the edges and almost push that buttercream off over the edge. So it's really important with these scrapers to hold the scraper in the right position. So place it on your cake at a 45-degree angle towards you, and you can see that I've spread my fingers up the side to maintain the straightness of the scraper. Line up the very bottom corner of the scraper with the bottom corner of your cake and start scraping. At first I'm going to go on with a light pressure just to kind of feel how the cake is reacting to the scraper, and go around a few times. And I can already see that there was a big build-up on the top of the cake, so I'm going to get rid of this and then continue scraping. Once again, you want an even layer of buttercream when you're using these scrapers, otherwise the stripes won't come out. So what you can see already starting to happen is that the indents of the scraper are creating these grooves in the buttercream. So a little bit of cake has started to show, but I'm not worried about that because that is where the indent is, and I'm going to fill that part with some more buttercream afterwards. The important bit are the grooves that are sticking out of the cake, and I want them extremely smooth. So you can see these grooves neatening out. However, I can see along the bottom, the grooves aren't so apparent. So I'm just going to apply a little bit more buttercream around the bottom to pack it out a little bit more to ensure that I can achieve those grooves like I have done with the rest of the cake. And you can see especially that bottom groove has become more apparent after having added extra buttercream to it. So as you can see, it does require a little bit of patience because you want these grooves to be as perfect as possible, because after we do the next stage, there's no going back. So what I'm looking for is the smoothness on the outer parts of the groove. I don't mind too much about the inner parts, especially, for example, where the cake is showing through, because I'm going to cover that afterwards. It's the white outer grooves that you want to look at. So For example, I've got a couple of air bubbles, so I just want to get rid of them before the cake chills in the freezer. And I'm just checking that the sides of the cake are nice and straight. So once again, what you're looking out for is not just a straight and smooth outside, but also these clear ridges, because what we're going to do now is chill this in the freezer for this to completely set, and then go and fill in these ridges with another color. You've noticed that I haven't cleaned off the top either. Because it's going in the freezer, I'm going to use that to my advantage and create some really sharp corners. So I'm going to put this cake in the freezer for about 20 minutes. So while that cake is setting in the fridge, I'm going to show you the other technique, which requires piping on the stripes. So I've colored some of my Swiss meringue buttercream pink, and I've left some buttercream white. So for piping on stripes, it's actually a lot easier than it looks. I'm not going to move the hand holding the piping bag. All the work is done by the turntable. What you need to make sure is that you're just constantly applying even pressure when you're squeezing the piping bag. So I'm going to start right at the bottom of the cake and angle the piping bag slightly away. So when I pipe on the buttercream like so, I'm actually getting the thickness of where I cut the piping bag. And I'm going to try and maintain that thickness all the way around the cake. I personally like to do 2 lines of each color, like so. But you can do the stripes as thin or as thickly as you want. Now, as you saw, I did not move my right hand. It was all in the turntable. So I'm going to do the exact same thing with the white and try and maintain the same thickness, both outwards and upwards, to get even stripes. You can also use those cake layers as a rough guide too. So I'm going to alternate between the 2 colors, and it doesn't matter if there are gaps in between the colors. If they're small, they will fill in when we scrape around. So if you want to do multiple colors, I recommend doing this technique as well, because then you can alternate between all the different colors. If you're using the scraper technique, you have to choose on one base color. Now, I've got to the top. I'm going to continue with the white and pipe all around the edge and then fill in the middle. Now, the middle doesn't have to be as thick as the sides are, but I do want to cover the majority of it. So I'm going to finish what's in the piping bag. So now it's like any other cake. I'm going to start off by flattening out the top using my palette knife and the turntable, rotating it and using the side of the palette knife to make a nice flat top, and scraping off any excess into a small bowl. And then I can start scraping round. So I have a straight-sided scraper here. The good thing with these pattern scrapers is that they do come with a straight edge, but you're holding it where the pattern is, and for me that's slightly uncomfortable. But of course you can use the other side. I prefer just using a plain scraper for this, and scrape the cake like I usually would. Only this time I'm really conscious of not moving the scraper because I want to maintain those stripes. So I'm going to start off with quite a light pressure because I don't really want to be scraping off any buttercream. I just want to even it out. I can see that I had quite a lot more on the top of the cake, so I'm going to scrape this off into the bowl and keep going until the sides are nice and smooth. Usually any gaps or bubbles tend to even out the more you scrape around it. If you do have quite a significant hole, you can go in with your piping bag again just to fill it up in that specific area. But it looks like I don't need to be doing that this time round. So just keep turning and letting the turntable and the scraper do the work for you. So the last finishing touch is just getting rid of those lines from the scraper. So this time, because I don't need to put the cake in the freezer because I'm done with the stripes, I'm going to clean off the corners like I usually would with the palette knife, going from the outside inwards and cleaning my scraper every time. So this is the freehand stripe technique. As you can see, the stripes aren't so defined as they will be with the other technique. However, it is a lot easier and quicker to do. So I tend to do this technique anyway, but I wanted to show you the difference. And of course, the stripes are still visible. What can happen is that the color actually bleeds into one another. So for example, here we've got a bit of pink going into the white, and that's because of when you're piping, maybe one layer was a little bit thicker than the other, but that just comes with practice. Anyway, I'm going to leave this to the side and finish off the other cake. So this cake ended up being in the freezer for a good half an hour. Now it's really important that this layer is super, super hard, otherwise the stripes will not work. So before I add the other color, I'm just going to get rid of the excess buttercream at the top using a sharp knife. Because it's hard, as I cut into the buttercream, it comes off really easily, and you achieve those amazingly sharp corners. And you can always tidy up any holes if you need. So now it's time to add the color. So I'm actually going to be using the same piping bag that I did for the other cake with the pink inside. And what I'm going to do is fill in these grooves. Now I don't want such a large amount of pink because the grooves are only about 1 or 2 millimeters thick. So I'm going to push the piping bag really close to the cake, only squeeze a little bit. So not the same amount as the other cake at all, a lot less. And repeat in every groove, including the very top. You can already see that these stripes are going to come out a lot more even. Once again, I'm going to take the plain-sided scraper rather than the patterned one, just for the comfort of my hand, and start scraping straight away. So same as I usually would. Now, because that white layer is completely frozen, it's not going to move when I scrape the pink. So just a couple of times around, you can see what's starting to happen. The grooves have filled in with the pink buttercream. Some buttercream has gone onto the white, but we're going to go round a few more times. I just want to take off that large amount of pink buttercream before I perfect the stripes. So this is when it can get a little bit tricky, because what you don't want to happen is the white getting too soft. So you want to keep going round, and eventually you pick off any of that coloured buttercream that's gone onto the white. And sometimes it happens a lot quicker than others. This time it's happened actually quite quickly, maybe because the white is extremely cold, so it's almost like the pink buttercream isn't sticking to it at all. So I've gone round enough times that the sides seem really straight, but there are a couple of pockets of pink that weren't quite hit with a scraper. So I'm going to go over a teeny amount of buttercream just in those areas and scrape once again to finish it off. So just the last finishing touches of any air bubbles that I can see, and scraping the last bits of pink off the white. And once you're happy, you can clean off the corners like normal. Beautiful stripe. So you can see it's a little bit of a longer process, but there's no doubt that these stripes are so much more even. So I'm just going to put this back in the fridge to firm up and then finish off both cakes with a little bit of decoration. So with the cakes side by side, there is a clear difference between the stripes. They both look good in their own way, so I'm going to decorate them differently too. Starting off with the one that I hand piped the stripes with a simple decoration. And I'm going to use a piping bag of multicolored buttercream. So I've got some pink and some purple and white all in here with a 1M nozzle. And I'm gonna pipe on top of the cake just around the outside and top it off with meringue kisses. So rather than doing a rosette, I'm just going to squeeze and let the buttercream kind of fall on top of itself, and you get this beautiful ripple of buttercream. And to make sure I have an even amount, I'm going to pipe one directly opposite and work around the cake like this. And then I'm going to go in between to complete the circle and create a whole border of this piped buttercream. So this is a really simple way of getting an effective decoration on top of a cake. So if you're just getting into cake decorating, then try something out like this. What I've got here as well are some simple meringue kisses which I'm going to place on top of the piping like so. And I've also got some sprinkles here just to liven it up a little bit. I'll sprinkle some on where I piped. And I'm also going to place some around the bottom too. And then using the palette knife, just pressing the sprinkles into the buttercream so they stick to the cake. So with the other cake, I'm going to do a little bit more refined decorations because the stripes are a little bit more refined themselves. So I have a small star tip here and I'm going to do a mixture of rosettes and stars on the top and then come down in a waterfall like so. I'll start with the top, piping out different sizes of rosettes and filling in with some stars as well. So although I'm piping with pretty simple shapes, the collection of smaller piped decorations gives such a nice effect. I love finishing off my cakes with this. And now I'm going to come down the front with a piped waterfall. So I'll start off with the rosettes where I want them. And then fill in with some simple star shapes too. And because I've got multicolours in my piping bags, the shapes really stand out. And I'll put a few kisses on top too, just for an added pop of colour. And the sprinkles of this cake I'm actually going to place on individually, which takes a little bit longer, but of course you get a more precise result. So there we go, two totally different styles of cake, both with pink and white stripes and decorated with some piped buttercream. Give each one a go. I've shown you the differences. It's completely up to you which one you prefer. There is no doubt that the stripes achieved using the pattern scraper are a lot more defined, but you saw the process is a little bit trickier and longer, of course. There is no right and wrong. See what one suits you. In the meantime, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already and comment below with more suggestions of tutorials that you'd like to see, and stay tuned for more tutorials on the way.